Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. At the most recent MCM Comic Con London, our sister company Titan Comics brought along to the show three of its top editors, Jake Devine, the mighty Phoebe Hedges, and the mighty thumbs-upping Calum Collins. And the Titan Comics editorial team, as typified by Jake and Phoebe and Calum, are experts in the art of the adaptation that is taking storylines and IP from other media, intellectual property from other media, films, TV, anime, cartoons, and turning them into comic books. They are experts in that field, and in fact, the Titan Comics editorial team are the greatest in the UK. The panel, which they co-hosted with myself and Forbidden Planet TV, was all about the art of the adaptation and how they do what they do, how they get those fantastic results. And also they gave some time to giving some advice as to how you can enter the comics industry, if indeed that's what you're interested in doing. It's interesting stuff. We had a great time on the panel and we're presenting it here for you now. Enjoy.
Hey everybody. Whoa, my name's Andrew Sumner. I'm a publisher and presenter. I'm also the EVP of Titan Comics. This is the Titan Comics editorial team. Give them a big round of applause, please. And as a sociological experiment, I would like you to try something before we get going, right? So my daughter, Lucifer Sumner, is working on the Forbidden Planet booth right there, right? So and I'm sure she can hear me. So I'm going to count you in 1, 2, 3, and then I want you to shout Lucifer, all right? Okay? So, 1, 2, 3. Lucifer! Yeah, so there she is. Yeah, right on. Right on. There's the very handsome Jay Binstead as well. Welcome everybody. Welcome indeed. So I'm going to introduce you to not 1, not 2, but 3 of the finest comics editors in the UK. So to my left, to my far left, we have Titan's group editor, Jake Devine, right here. Give him a round of applause. Right in the middle, we have the poised and powerful editor, that is Phoebe Hedges, right here. And on my left, we have the man who gives the greatest thumbs up in British comics. Go on, Calum, give it a go. There we go, Calum Collins, Titan Comics editor. So, welcome to our Art of Adaptation panel. What goes on when we adapt other mediums into the comics medium. But before we get talking about that, I'm going to get these guys to introduce themselves and tell you a bit about who they are and how they came to be. Starting, I think, with you, Jake.
Hello, so I'm Jake. I'm the group editor at Titan Comics. So I oversee the editorial team, these guys and a couple of others, as well as working on my own titles such as Doctor Who, Horizon Zero Dawn, Bloodborne, a bunch of other stuff. I started about 5 years ago now as an editorial assistant, and I've been working my way up till now and having a good time.
Excellent. He wouldn't really say anything other than, I'm having a good time. It would be a foolhardy way to end his introduction. Phoebes, how about you?
Hiya, I'm Phoebe. I am an editor at Titan, as Andrew said. I work on Life is Strange, the recently announced Dead by Daylight series.
Hey.
As well as I've done Battletoads and Sea of Thieves. Very similar to Jake, I came into Titan as an editorial assistant, and here I am 3 years later.
Excellent. Round of applause for Phoebe. Okay, Calum, give us that thumbs up one more time, mate. Right. See what I mean?
Hello.
Feeling it? So, Calum, what do you do and how did you come to be, mate?
I'm an assistant editor. My name's Calum Collins, and yeah, I started as an editorial assistant as well. That seems to be the prescribed path, and I've been at Titan for about a year now. I've worked on a range of different titles, but at the moment I'm working on Kamen Rider, Zero One. Yes! Kamen Rider fans in the house represent. And then I'm also working on some of our manga titles as well, which is really, really exciting.
As am I, some of which we can't tell you about, some of which we can tell you about. We've got some great manga coming up. So as to the theme of our panel, the art of adaptation. Guys, what's involved in a comics adaptation from another medium?
A lot of different things.
It's a wildly open-ended question, isn't it? So why don't you take a relatively holistic and chronological approach as to what happens, Jake?
I mean, in a general adaptation, you know, we're very familiar with adapting different media into comics. We take, you know, film, video games, TV series, books, lots of, you know, different varieties. So really, the first step is, you know, how we're going to adapt it. You know, are we doing a direct adaptation? Are we going to just try and do something new that fits into an established continuity? And then once you've sort of got the semblance of a story that you're going to tell, then it's, particularly with comics, the art direction. You know, are we going to get something that specifically captures the exact nature of what we're adapting? Are we going to try something different? And then really, as with any comic, you need to get a writer and artist on board to fulfill your vision, essentially, and pretty much take it from there like any other comic.
Phoebes, what do you think of the comics, or sequential art, to use a more highfalutin phrase? What do you think it brings to the adaptation of other narrative media?
I think it's a really interesting one, because with comics and sequential art, because especially for video games or sort of movies, the moment happens and then it's gone. Whereas with a graphic novel or a comic, you can really dwell and sit on each panel, and so there's a lot more, you can absorb a lot more from it.
I think that is very interesting, and I think one of the first people who I think really thought about that in any great detail is a very famous comics creator from the 40s called Will Eisner, who's responsible for a lot of language of the medium and the way it works. And Eisner thought a great deal about the way that sequential art storytelling actually works. And I think that's worth having a few more words on, because the thing with comics is you can relax and increase pace just on the page by how you lay those panels out. Can you guys talk about that a bit more?
Yeah, so I come from a background of prose writing, so moving into the world of comics is really, really interesting, because the scripts are structured so much like film scripts, but they take each moment rather than having these defined arcs. So you have X, Y, Z happens, and they all happen in their own individual panels. So you really get to take a time to just relax and enjoy what's going on, which is really, really exciting.
Yeah, I think to follow on from that as well, so for things that we're adapting, and say we've got a minimalized thing to do it in, so we're only doing say a 4-issue miniseries of like a whole series on TV or something, we've got to choose specifically what we want to be in those series and in those issues, and in each panel, you know, take what parts of the medium and the story that we want, and what is the most important for putting in that comic, you know, because sometimes we can't put everything in there. So for every single panel, every single page, what is the most important that's key to that story that's going to work in this format?
I think one of the interesting things about adaptation is it always means that you're working with another creative outlet, which are the original intellectual property holders and the original people who created that piece of art in whatever format it was, whether it was a stage play, a movie, a TV, a book. That's a very fine balance to walk, isn't it, when you're creating comic books? Can you talk a bit about the process of dealing with licensors? This is a fundamental part of adaptation.
Yeah, so it depends. I mean, a lot of licensors are very different and have a very different approach to how they want to make comics. Some have a heavy involvement, some are happy to sort of sit back a little and let us do things the way we want to do it. So it's very collaborative on which one they are. So we would want to take what they want, say, hey, this is what we want, and then try and find a medium ground. Sometimes there's a little bit of push either way, particularly with how I said earlier about, say, continuity and stuff, and established parts of the universe in that license that we would want to keep and we have to keep for certain reasons, and then trying to do something creative and new while not, you know, straying too far from the established brand. So yeah, it's an interesting way to work, because you've got to try and keep it creative while also keeping it the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah, just to go off the back of what Jay was saying, particularly with Kamen Rider, the licensors Toei, who they love this series and they've been making it for years. And so I think we got a little armor detail wrong, and they came back and went, hang on a second. and we had to come back and fix it. And it's that kind of passion that when you work with a licensor and they really know what they're doing, that is really, really exciting, because everyone's in it because they love it, hopefully.
I think that comes down to sort of our roles as well. You know, a lot of brands and IPs that we're working on, you know, as much as we try to be, we can't be experts on everything. So it's really a good relationship to keep with the licensor, because they are your go-to. You know, they know what's what in their brand. So as much as we want to try and get it right, we still have to lean on them to be like, okay, is this right? And they go, no, this needs to change, or yeah, you've nailed it. So it's really good.
Yeah, I think the other fine line that's very difficult to walk is so we have to maintain the relationship with the licensor and the original creators, phenomenally important, as the guys have said. And then the other thing is, these guys have to be very aware of what works within the comics medium that might not necessarily work within film or TV or vice versa. And that's really the spine of how you adapt something. Can you talk a bit about that? Because it's a huge challenge for all of you.
Yeah, I think obviously we adapt a lot of our media from things that have soundtracks, or music is such a huge part of it. And in comics, you can obviously have speech bubbles or caption boxes and SFX. And I think the fine balance I found is how much do you want to tell someone what it sounds like, rather than letting them imagine through sort of the artwork and sort of context of the panel. Because I don't have a lot of SFX in my own personal comics, because they're much sort of, I mean, Life is Strange is it's not an action-packed series. Whereas I imagine something like Kamen Rider has got that kind of pow, bop, you know.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, with Kamen Rider, the SFX is so important, and the adapting between the mediums and walking that fine line with the licensors. The really exciting things is when we get to create things. So while 01 has to look and behave a certain way, we have our new villain, Ragnarok, which was an original creation that is just so much fun. Because we can go, okay, well, what can we do in the Kamen Rider world that's going to make him fun?
That's sort of following on from Phoebe as well. Like, for example, when I worked on Cowboy Bebop, you know, that had a very heavily influenced sort of like jazz style for the soundtrack, and I think the way Lamar Mathurin, the artist, incorporated that into his artwork was really just, he was imagining the sound visually, like what that would look like, and he took a lot from like the opening credits and where that really stood out, and that sort of like led the aesthetic of the comic, which I thought was like really cool and really incredible. It was something unique that made it different from the anime and the Netflix series, but also, you know, being true to its roots.
Guys, you've touched upon something that fascinates me, because I've spent my entire life like reading and collecting comics, and I own a ridiculous number of comics. I'd be embarrassed to tell you what the number is, but it's massive. But the thing is, one thing I always struggle with, despite how comics literate I am, is the difference between Western comics and manga, right? And you guys have got to edit manga in the same way that you have to edit and adapt manga into Western comics. Can you talk a bit about that? Because I find that fascinating.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. First of all, of course, manga, when we're publishing, we stick to very much the Japanese format. So the first big difference is reading from right to left rather than left to right. So that's really interesting and always fun when you're trying to design the pages, because you always have to read it sort of from bottom to top, and it's like a PDF format rather than top to bottom. So that's always fun when you sort of forget for a moment and start reading and go, "Hang on, this makes no sense at all." And so that's really interesting. And then also, it's trying to keep it as close to the original as possible. So we sort of like take and translate manga that already exists, whereas in the comics that we're doing, it's all pretty much brand new and very creative, just using the IP that exists. So it's slightly different work that you have to do on each. I mean, I'd say it's slightly less on a manga because the property itself actually exists, but just trying to translate it and make it, you know, work for particularly for us, our UK and US audience, and make sure that it hits the fans who are already fans of the Japanese versions. It's a lot of pressure, but it's cool.
Now, as to the art of being an editor, the other thing that's a fundamental part of the comics business is you work with writers who turn narrative into visual images. We work with artists/writers who visualize those images. The art is such an important and key part of a comic book. So can you guys talk a bit about the process of how you appoint an artist for a book, how you do that, what it's like working with an artist as opposed to a writer?
trying to find an artist for certain books is interesting because these brands all have a very distinct vision and sort of visual style. Usually we also get a nice handy like lore bible that has sort of in certain cases, you know, turnarounds of characters and stuff pre-made. So you then have like, we bring an artist on board after pitching them to a licensor and then go through several rounds of character designs before they sort of start the comic proper. And really it's just about nailing sort of expressions and stuff, because in volume 6 of Life is Strange, we had a really cool like backup and prequel to the latest Life is Strange game, True Colors. And so that was really great because we were developing that as Square Enix were announcing the game and bringing it out. So we had the first sort of Alex Chen, we had her first appearance in print. So it took quite a while to nail, you know, how does she look in this lighting? How do we make sure that she is faithful to the game, but also keeping with the style of Claudia, our artist? And that was a really fun thing to develop.
Yeah, no, I can see that. How about yourself, Jake?
I would say, you know, you need to find someone, particularly for something like Doctor Who, where, you know, you've got these established characters, you know, millions of people around the world know who these characters are and what they look like, and you want to get someone who can capture that, you know, in comic form. And I think like Roberta, our artist on that, was, you know, she nails it. She's got a really sort of simple way of capturing faces where she doesn't put too much detail in there, but it really, you know, you can look at that and go exactly who it is, because obviously the last thing you want in a Doctor Who comic is to pick it up and go, you know, who's this random person wearing the Doctor's clothes? Like, it's got to match up, it's got to represent what we're trying to show.
The IP holder is looking for something that respects the brand, maintains the image of it, but also looking for something fresh. We've talked about how artists to pick. What about writers? How are they chosen? On what basis?
I think it's a similar thing where, you know, you've got to, while you don't see the visual of what they want to tell, they'll pitch the ideas and we'll see like what is their vision for this story and for this IP. What can they bring as a writer that's different and new while, you know, capturing or understanding the brand. We've said before about artists, you know, if they're fans, that really helps because it shows their love in the work they produce. It's the same with writers, you know, if they're a fan of the show or movie or whatever it is, then, you know, they understand it, they know what needs to go in it, they know what fans are looking for. So I think it's easier to have from that perspective. For example, Dan Waters, who did Man Who Fell to Earth and Cowboy Bebop, both very different, but he understood what was needed in each. So for Man Who Fell to Earth, it was, you know, essentially a direct adaptation. You're just taking the movie and putting it into comic form, but how do you do that in the limited, you know, 128 pages that we have? What do you need from that movie that's really going to capture its essence exactly the same as the film? Whereas in Cowboy Bebop, he could take what there was from the original source material and sort of play around in that universe and take the elements of it, but, you know, do something new with it. So it's really just finding a writer who knows what they want to do with the IP and what works for that particular IP.
To expand on that, when I look for writers, obviously not everyone posts online, I wish I could write Life is Strange, or I wish I could write Dead by Daylight. It'd be really fab if they did. So often I start with genre. I find writers who exist in a certain genre and then see if they can then bring their genre understanding to the niche that is a certain IP. Just come back to Dead by Daylight because it's going to be great. Nadia Shamas didn't have a lot of horror experience from what I could see. Squire is a young adult book. She's had a book where Black Stars Rise, which is really also an adaptation, interestingly, of a play. But she is such a huge fan. So she understands that kind of depth to it. And sort of bounce back onto how do you pick which characters do you go for. Sometimes it's 50-50. Sometimes for me, licensors have an idea of who they want to focus on and who they bring to the party. But other stories like The Legion for Dead by Daylight, that was Nadia's pitch. We said to Nadia, what do you want to write in the world of Dead by Daylight? And she said Legion. And we said, okay, let's go.
Brilliant. You got anything to say, Colin?
All I can say is exactly what these guys have said. It's just you're looking for passionate people who know the business and can deliver an exciting story while remaining true to the form.
As I say, like someone who can write a comic script, because it is, you know, a niche thing. It's not like Cam said before. It's not prose. It's like a film script, but it's not a film script. So it's good to have someone who knows how to write a comic script.
And you can find the outline of lots of comic scripts online, and there's plenty of examples there. So this has been Titan Comics Art of the Adaptation. Before we go, I just want to say a quick thank you to Perry, our soundman. Thank you, mate. Give him a round of applause. Woo! To our PR team at Titan who set this up, Will O'Mullane and Alexander Itchett, right in the corner here. Stand up, guys. There they are. Come on. They're already standing. No, they're not. Yeah. Okay. Good. And our videographer, Phil Wallis, right here. Yes. Yes. Don't do that. And this has been Jake Devine, Phoebe Hedges, the thumb himself, Calum Collins. And I'm Andrew Sumner. And come and check us out on YouTube, Forbidden Planet TV on YouTube. You see me interviewing all of these guys and a whole bunch of other people. We have 4 new episodes every week. Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you
so
for
much,
coming.
guys.
Thank you for coming.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.